Dixie here. Today I want to talk to you about lessons that some of us hikers tend to learn the hard way. You'll probably either learn to avoid these mistakes from watching this video, or you'll just laugh because you've already made them. First, always carry a light source. Now this one tends to be a mistake made more by day hikers, because typically folks who are out on a backpacking trip plan to have some sort of light source in the dark once they get to camp, and if you don't, then you only make that mistake one time. But day hikers will get out on a trail with no intention of being out there past dark, so they just won't think about bringing some sort of light source. But the trail could end up being more difficult than you thought, or you could end up with an injury that causes you to go slower, or maybe you just stop to really take in the views for a little bit longer than you intended. Whatever reason, it sucks to end up walking to your car in the dark, or it's very stressful to only have the light of your almost dead cell phone, so you have to make the decision to retain that battery or use it for a light source. Ask me how I know. But anyway, your best bet is to carry with you the 10 essentials of hiking, regardless if you're planning to overnight or not, especially if you're not planning to overnight, because that way if you end up in some type of emergency situation, you will have everything that you need. So I will link to a video about the 10 essentials of hiking in the video description of this video if you would like to learn more about that. Next, not all trail miles are equal. When you think about a mile-long stretch, it probably doesn't seem like that far of a distance, especially if your only comparison is a mile-long stretch of like flat road. But depending on where that mile of trail is located and how difficult the terrain is, it can take you wildly different time spans to complete a mile section of trail depending on where you're at in the world. For example, the Mahoosuc Notch on the Appalachian Trail is known as the most difficult mile of trail, or the most fun mile, depending on your perspective. But for me, it was super difficult. Some parts kind of fun just because, you know, you either have to laugh or cry. But it took me a really long time to do that stretch of trail. Also, if you've seen my Florida Trail videos, the Bradwell Bay section, if you're planning to do that, that will take you significantly longer than, you know, other parts of the Florida Trail. Most people's pace typically falls between 2 to 3, or if you're like really fast, maybe 4 miles per hour on a trail, but not in those specific areas that I talked about. You can expect to go much more slowly. So my point is, knowing the terrain before you get out there is definitely important for knowing how long you should expect to be out on your trip, whether that's a day hike or a weekend hike. Knowing how much food you have to carry or water between stretches. All of that is super important, and is not just based on the mileage of trail, but also how long it's going to take you to actually do those miles. You can find out more about terrain on a trail by checking apps like the All Trails app and reading comments on difficulty, or if it's in the Far Out app. And then we have the Homemade Wanderlust backpacking forum group on Facebook. There are over 60,000 members, so if you post a question in there, a lot of times somebody has done a trail that you're interested in. And then of course there are regional groups on Facebook and other social media outlets that you can join and ask some of these questions.
You got some hail on your britches.
Check the weather forecast. This one might seem kind of like a no-brainer, but you would be surprised at how many people are like, well, I'm a backpacker, so I have all of the gear that I might need to cover all weather that I could encounter, like rain and cold, etc. But I'm not just talking about, is it gonna rain? I'm talking about like horrible storms that could be potentially coming through an area that you're planning to go backpacking. So it always makes sense to look ahead for those things, but sometimes you might even change what you're going to carry based on, you know, how exactly cold is it going to get at night. If it's going to be below freezing, well then I'm going to take some hand warmers. Honestly, if it's going to be below 50 at night, I'm going to take some hand warmers. Also, depending on where you're going, so if I'm going backpacking in an area where there's a green tunnel, like on the East Coast, just trees everywhere, and it's not supposed to rain, then I'm not going to carry my umbrella because I won't be exposed, and trying to use it as a shelter from the sun. So anyway, it's best to just check ahead, get all the information you can about the area that you're going, and then you can plan accordingly or switch up your plans if you need to. Next, keep your self-care items easy to reach. I don't know how many times I've heard hikers talk about, I was getting a hot spot, but I was just only a mile from camp and I didn't want to stop and deal with it. So I pushed on and now I've got this oozing blister. Things like blister care, sunscreen, chapstick, or anything else that you could potentially need in a moment to make yourself more comfortable, and not using it could in the long term really make you very uncomfortable. Just have it like in your hip belt pockets, or even if you have to carry a fanny pack, because having those things handy makes it more likely that you're going to deal with them immediately instead of putting it off for the next break when it's easier to access. Because even though it seems like from the comfort of your home, what's the big deal? Just stop, put your pack down, unpack it, use it, and then put it away and keep going. It can just feel like a monumental task to have to stop and take your pack off and dig in it to access something, when if you could just grab it and easily do it on the go. Or even blister care, you have to take your pack off, but maybe not having to dig way down in the bottom of it. The more convenient it is to take care of yourself, the more likely you're going to do it. Temperature ratings on sleeping bags are not all created equal. This is one that sucks to learn the hard way. The sleeping bag I had on the Appalachian Trail was rated for survival. Sleeping bags that I have gotten since then, I've made sure that the survival rating is much lower and the comfort rating is what I'm really looking at. So if you're not sure what number you're looking at, then definitely reach out to the manufacturer and verify, because you just want to know what you're getting yourself into so that you can be as comfortable as possible when you're sleeping out on trail and not shivering through the night for a week-long trip and, you know, having to make the decision to turn back because you didn't know that that was a survival rating and not a comfort rating. Next, carrying too much. This goes for carrying too much food, water, clothes, just weight in general. And I probably shouldn't even include this one because it kind of seems like at this point this is a rite of passage for backpackers. You're going to carry too much of something at some point, if not too much of multiple things, just because this is something that somebody can tell you all day, but until you really get into your groove and get more experienced and learn what you need and what you don't and what you prefer and what you can go without, then you know, you're gonna carry too much. We pack our fears, so whatever you're afraid of, if that's being hungry, cold, thirsty, you're likely going to overpack in those areas. But again, I will just stress, like everybody else, that ounces add up to pounds, and too many pounds can lead to pain. Just try to sit down and truly think, like, what are my necessities that I must have? You know, a need pile and a want pile, and I'd probably just leave the whole want pile at home and stick with the needs to start with. I saw somebody post on Facebook when I was talking about, you know, what are some of the things you think hikers learn the hard way? And they said that backpacking is the art of knowing what not to bring, and that is so true. Eat before you're hungry and drink before you're thirsty. I had this crotchety old man on the Appalachian Trail who was a trail maintainer, and he's just so grumpy, but he said something that did stick with me, and that's, if you're thirsty, then it's already too late. Like, you're already dehydrated. And I mean, it really is true. You've got to stay up on that stuff. So really focus on making sure you're snacking on breaks or even while you're walking down the trail, and hydrating frequently. That way you don't find yourself just really low on calories, really dehydrated, and in a mess having to cut your trip short. Always take the time to make sure that your shelter is properly pitched. Sometimes when hikers get to camp, and this is especially true for through hikers who are sometimes busting out really big miles and getting into camp even after dark, you can be tired and just kind of lax with your shelter setup. But it's important that if you're gonna put one up, you might as well do it the right way, because it sucks to, in the middle of the night, realize, oh my gosh, it's raining and things aren't set up properly, or worse, to wake up freezing cold, wet, in a puddle of rain because you didn't have things, you know, taut like they should be, and your tent got flooded. The sky can look clear as you're going to bed and then surprise you in the middle of the night. And I know some of y'all are probably like, well, wait a second, haven't you cowboy camped, Dixie? Well, yes, I certainly have, and that is a risk that you do take with cowboy camping. And I have certainly had to scramble in the middle of the night to get up and get my shelter put up and put all my stuff in it. But if you're going to put up a shelter, then just go on and do it the right way. And an example of this would be you set up your tent and you get everything kind of staked out and you're putting the last stake in and there's a rock. So you can only get the stake to go in like an inch in the ground. Okay, well, it'll work to house you for the night and keep the mosquitoes out and whatever, not a big deal. But if in the middle of the night the winds start picking up and it starts raining, well, then you've got all your stuff already spread out in the middle of your tent, and then you're having to get up and get out because that stake keeps getting snatched up, and then it compromises the integrity of your shelter, and then you're getting flooded. Whereas if you had just taken the time to move everything, even though it seemed like a big deal at the time, you know, you wouldn't have that issue. But instead, you're going to battle it all night. But this not only goes for the actual setup of your shelter, but just like checking the site preparation. You'll have a really uncomfortable night if you didn't move some pine cones and sticks and certain things, especially if your sleeping pad gets popped. Also checking for widowmakers. You definitely want to take the time to look up, make sure there aren't any dead limbs that are going to fall on your head in the middle of the night and then you sleep forever. And then checking for depressions and things like that for areas that could get flooded if it does rain. And I will say that if you carry an inReach, it doesn't hurt sometimes to check a weather report on the inReach, and it will give you a weather report for the location that you're at, not like a nearby town like your cell phone will. So I do like to use that sometimes for, you know, if I'm in a cowboy camp, like, well, let me see if it's supposed to be clear. But just know in the mountains, the weather can change quickly. Next, scope out water sources before you go. You want to make sure that when you're going backpacking, you're going to have the water sources available that seem like they should be available. Like, you need to know that the creek is actually running. Some ways that you can check this is in Facebook groups for these regions or local trails. Ask questions. Maybe there's somebody in there that has hiked it recently and they can verify, yes, these creeks are running. If you're going to hike in a national park or a state park, you can hit up the ranger station a lot of times, call them and verify that you'll have, you know, ample water. Or sometimes there are comments in apps like the All Trails app or, again, Far Out. And last but not least, check for ticks. This could be one that's really bad to learn the hard way by getting Lyme disease or another tick-borne illness. Again, when you get to camp, you might be like, gosh, I'm so tired. And you don't necessarily have to check for ticks when you get to camp in the evening. If it's something that you prefer to do when you first wake up in the morning because you're more alert then or whatever, that's fine. But basically, you want to take one consistent time of the day where you check yourself for ticks, because ticks typically need to be attached for like 36 to 48 hours at least for transmitting Lyme disease. So if you can catch them on you within the first 24-hour period, you are a lot less likely to end up with something gnarly. So having that one consistent time of day, whenever that's convenient for you. I like doing it in my tent because checking some of those harder to see areas is just not something I want to do out in the open where, you know, children could walk by or anybody else for that matter. So for checking those areas that are not so easy to see with just your eyeballs, you can carry a small mirror or even use your cell phone. Well, all right, y'all, that is all I have for you today on lessons that backpackers and hikers tend to learn the hard way. If you have any other lessons that you've learned the hard way while out on trail, I would love for you to share those in the comments below, because then again, people can either learn from you or laugh with you because they've done it too. Thank y'all so much for watching, and we will see y'all next time.